Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for Aquarius and Aquarius rising for January of 2019. Joining me today is Cam White. Hey, Cam.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to be looking at your transits for the next few weeks, so let's jump right into it. So first is the transit chart, which shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the month and how far through the zodiac they'll get by the end of the month. Then we also have an ingress chart that shows when the planets will move into different signs, when the lunations will take place, retrograde stations, and also exact aspects. So there's quite a bit going on this month. I'm trying to think, where should we start? If we should start with chronologically, like what happens first, or if we should start with just like what are some of the more notable things that happen this month?
Well, I think we should let's definitely talk about the Capricorn 12th house stuff because I mean we'll be getting back to that, but I just think that's such a interesting place for things to be happening at versus, with everything else that's going on. There's a lot more positive things going on. It's just the 12th house, I think, is a weird place that we should address first. And especially with the first weekend of January, we have Mercury ingressing into Capricorn and we have the solar eclipse in Capricorn, which is a new moon.
Right. So those two are taking place on the 4th and the 5th of January, respectively.
Yeah. And that's in the 12th house where this is happening is we were just talking about this, is such a weird area. The 12th house, deals with hidden things, suppressed or unacknowledged parts of yourself. It deals with, it's the place between worlds. It's a very blinding it's a blinding house or where you don't always see things. It's hidden.
Right.
And you were hitting on the point where it's, about enemies as well.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally in ancient astrology, the 11th house is about friends and those who support you or support your life. And the 12th is about the opposite of that, which is like people that don't necessarily support you or may work at cross purposes to you. And sometimes that's kind of an abstract concept, like the idea of quote unquote enemies, but sometimes it can be really relevant just in terms of identifying sometimes people in our life that are not as helpful as they could be and what role they play, whether it ends up being a negative role or an inadvertently sometimes positive role when somebody that's like working at cross purposes like accidentally ends up helping you out unintentionally, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, of course, part of longer term transits that we talked about last month of Saturn transiting through Capricorn and transiting through your 12th house over the course of a 2 or 3 year period that started in December of 2017. But this month, we really start to see some of that transit is going to become more active and more of the focal point in one's life because this first solar eclipse that's taking place in Capricorn starting on the 5th.
Yeah, and I mean, with Saturn being in your 12th house, that's always a difficult thing to deal with. However, with the sun going through right there, I think this is where this is going to start to be illuminated, when we're talking about the 12th house, repressed, unacknowledged things, problems maybe, could be good, could be bad, but just more of inner reflection. And I think the sun hitting Saturn is like, hey, what's, we were talking about this with the South Node being there as well, and this eclipse that's on the South Node or pretty much next to it. It deals with, what has worked in the past, what has not worked in the past, reflecting on where you set boundaries, where you established walls in the past, or maybe within yourself and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And this is a new moon. This is about resetting energy, refreshing energy, setting in new intentions.
Yeah, and the 12th house, it's the very last house. So it's kind of like the end of the cycle, and it's the house that planets go through right before they emerge into the first house and sort of start the cycle or the sequence of moving through the houses over again. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons I think the 12th has to do with this idea of endings or this idea of like reflecting on sort of how far you've come as those planets have transited all the way around your chart and right before they sort of start the cycle over again. So that can sort of be more of a contemplative or reflective time in which you're reflecting on the past, in which you're sometimes like letting go of previous things that no longer serve you or
having
that you've grown
closure.
Out of. Yeah, closure. That's a great keyword, I think, for this month with that eclipse taking place in Capricorn, because it's sort of opening up a sequence. It's not going to be the end. This is sort of
This is just the beginning.
The beginning of the end. I think that was actually one of the keywords that I either used for last month's horoscopes or that I sort of flirted with using because, yeah, this is the first of a sequence of eclipses that's going to take place in your 12th house over the next year and a half or so. So it's sort of like, starting to wrap things up and starting to get ready to eventually move into a new area or new cycle of your life. But first, the question is like, what do you have to let go of or what do you have to bring to completion?
Yeah, it's kind of like just reviewing everything just to double check everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, the good thing is after that, we do have Uranus going direct.
Yes. So Uranus is going direct in Aries, which is the third house for those with Aquarius rising. And this is complemented by a Mars transit that's taking place all month, which is also going through Aries and also going through your third house of communication, short distance travel. Siblings is a common third house topic. What are some other third house ones?
Your local environment, like your neighbors and things like that. One that I like to use, like I was referring just to another video, I forgot which one. But Dane Regier talks about this, the third house being how you utilize things. Like the first house is who you are, the second house is what you have, and the third house is how you use it.
Okay.
And I think that's such a really good way to look at the third house because it has to do with, writing and journaling and writing things down like that. So it's kind of like, how do you utilize your words and your vocabulary to express what you're trying to do? And I think with Mars being right there, where Mars is action, determination, drive, he can deal with issues and severing and cutting, but he's in his home sign of Aries where he's wanting to accomplish and he's wanting to do. I think Mars going in through that third house area is really kind of asking you like, hey, how can you really utilize your energy? How can you best utilize yourself and where can you direct that and channel that into? And with Uranus going direct right there, I think that's that clarity, that breakthrough moment when, Prometheus steals the lightning from the gods and frees the people where it's like, oh, now I understand how I can be creative about this. Now I understand how I can really go about this in a very, I don't want to say unique way, but in the way that's best going to utilize the energy that you have versus the resources that you have.
Yeah, this is definitely going to bring more energy and more focus on things like communication this month. Mars going through the third house, maybe more focus on travel, especially short distance, but definitely want to be careful to some of that energy can sometimes boil over and into like strife or conflict or even verbal sort of arguments with people or argumentativeness. So you want to be careful about that, especially with third house type people in your life, which can be people like siblings, but also like close people who are like almost like your siblings practically.
Neighbors,
relatives. Yeah, conflicts. That's a great one.
Don't yell at your neighbor.
Right, for Mars in the third house. And then finally, I love that. So Uranus stationing at the very beginning of the second week or end of the first week. It's stationing direct in Aries on the 6th of January. And this is the very last station of Uranus after a 7-year-long transit through your third house. And Uranus always brings some sort of unexpected, but typically very radical changes in terms of whatever area of the chart it transits through. And for you, going through your third house of communication and education and other things like that has probably brought a lot of changes and a lot of radical departures to the way that you communicate and express yourself over the course of most of the last decade. And so part of this very last station of Uranus in the third house this month is sort of looking back and reflecting on how far you've come since Uranus originally went into that house back in 2011.
Totally. And I think, it's just exciting because we have Uranus going direct, Mars and Aries, and then the very next day we have Venus ingressing into Sagittarius, into your 11th house. So she's finally, out of your 10th house where she was retrograding in Scorpio, and she's in 11th house. She's, flying towards Jupiter where she's going to give him a really big hug. And Venus in Sagittarius is about bringing that value and about finding and discovering things. And this is in the 11th house of friendships and community and networks and big groups of people. So I do think Venus going through this part is really exciting when it comes to terms of, finding more people that are associated with, your beliefs, or maybe finding a group of people to learn something new with. Or just having more friends around you, valuing the people that you're surrounding yourself with. I think Venus ingressing into Sagittarius in your 11th house is going to be a very social time.
Yeah, and that's really accentuating that Jupiter transit that started recently that lasts for an entire year of Jupiter going through your 11th house and themes of like growth and expansion when it comes to friends and groups and alliances, and Venus going into Sagittarius and then catching up with and conjoining Jupiter around the 22nd is really just gonna heighten and exacerbate that positive transit, especially for those of you with night charts. The people with day charts, they're getting the positive or most positive Jupiter transit all year, but the people with night charts, this is when things really balance out and you get a really positive accentuation of that transit as well. And look at it here, it's actually forming a grand fire trine around January 21st or January 22nd, where Venus joins up and exactly conjoins Jupiter at 15-16 Sagittarius, and that's trine to Mars at 14 Aries, and the moon swoops in and completes the grand trine from the middle degrees of Leo.
as quoting Chris Brennan from earlier, a sexy grand trine.
Yeah, that is a nice looking grand trine, I have to say.
And it is looking so good.
So good.
Yeah, especially for a fire sign like me. So I do think Venus and Sagittarius is going to be extremely positive. It's going to be trining Mars, making that conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, Jupiter's in Sag in your 11th house, like friends, networks, communities, big groups of people. That's coming. Like Jupiter's wanting to bring those gifts, and I think Venus being in Sagittarius is finding the value in that and exploring those options.
Yeah, and the best thing you can do is to take this as an opportunity to put yourself out there and try to like form some of those relationships or form some new friendships or go out into a social setting that you've never done before. Because if you do that, if you put the energy into that and if you make the first move, I think you're going to find this month more than any other time, other people are going to be receptive to it, and you'll be surprised at how well it goes in terms of being able to create new alliances in your life that you didn't even have previously, or in some instances to reconnect and reform or sort of re-solidify old alliances and friendships that previously maybe were a little bit more rocky or more on shaky ground.
Yeah, I feel like this is nails to a chalkboard for Aquarius rising. Like, oh no, I got to go get friends. Yeah, don't isolate yourself this month. You got people that want to meet you and party with you. Go have fun. But I mean, after that, that's kind of like that middle part. There's just going to be some fun fire stuff. But then after that, we have the sun ingress into Aquarius and the full moon in Leo.
Yeah, sun ingress into Aquarius on the 20th. And then immediately the very next day, we have a lunar eclipse that's taking place in Leo on the 21st of the month. And that is in the 7th house of relationships for those with Aquarius rising.
Yeah, this looks great. This just looks like, I mean, the chart that you pulled up earlier was for like the next day after that eclipse. And this is kind of bringing to culmination, bringing a last realization of things that you've dealt with interpersonal relationships, one-on-one relationships. This has to deal with marriage. This also can deal with lawsuits or anything like that you could be dealing with. This full moon, it's a total lunar eclipse. So it's kind of like, I guess, very eclipsing in a sense, but I think this is bringing the idea of what have you learned about relationships? Where are you seeing the value? Where are you seeing the benefit? Where are you sharing not only this is Leo stuff, very solar, very energetic, very loving, where is that energy being reciprocated in relationships? Are you putting it out there and are you getting it in? Especially while Venus is in Sagittarius and Jupiter's in Sag in your 11th house. This is connecting to bigger groups of people, but this is also finding the one-on-one value extremely valuable and really, taking heed with that.
Yeah. And this is not something new that's just like suddenly coming into your life. This is like the completion of a sequence or a series of eclipses that have been bouncing back and forth between your 1st house of self and your 7th house of other people in your life, like especially close interpersonal one-on-one relationships in your life over the past couple of years. So what this is a lunar eclipse is a culmination of events with respect to your 7th house, where some of the themes and lessons that you've been learning and initiating over the course of the past couple of years really are brought to completion or brought to a culmination at this point, so that you can see the outcome of some of the energy that you put out previously in that area of your life, especially 6 months ago when there was the last solar eclipse in Leo. We're seeing that be brought to completion now with the final lunar eclipse of that sequence.
Yeah, and I just think it's relatively going to be positive.
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. It's not like doing challenging things like some of the other eclipses.
And this is what I wanted to, we've been talking about this in the other videos, but immediately after that, well, not immediately, a couple days later on January 24th, we have Mercury ingressing into Aquarius going into your 1st house. So Mercury being in Capricorn in that 12th house area, it's kind of like miscommunications, maybe not being able to fully express or say what it is that you want to say. Mm-hmm. But as Mercury goes into Aquarius, into your 1st house, where you can be more self-expressive, communicate the ideas or how you feel about certain situations a lot more clearly. As Mercury moves forward and as we get to January 29th, Mercury is actually going to conjoin the sun at 8 degrees Aquarius, which is just a degree off from where Mars retrograded over this last summer.
Right.
And that was a big deal. That was in your 1st house. Like, that was a huge thing. It could have been right on your ascendant or somewhere near it. And I think that Mercury Sun conjunction that's happening in your 1st house is going to bring a lot more clarity to the issues and the problems that you could have had 6 months or however long ago that retrograde was.
Half a year, whatever last summer was here in the Northern Hemisphere in like mid 2018, when when it stationed retrograde in Aquarius and kept going back and forth over the rising sign of those of us with Aquarius rising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of the tensions or sometimes the problems that created, especially if they came from yourself, if you were the one that initiated them, with Mercury and the Sun now moving into Aquarius and then conjoining in that sign, it could be like cleaning up or cleaning up after some of the chaos of that retrograde in the first house now that it's finally officially over.
And I just think that whole, the area of self as we get into January and February, the area of yourself before we get actually into your birthday, if you're an Aquarius sun, this whole time is really just going to start bringing up a lot more clarity, a lot more connection, a lot more like, okay, this is how I see things through this perspective. This is how I can connect all the dots. I think a lot of that energy is just going to start coming at the end of the month, especially with in the earlier part of the month where we have all this 12th house things of hidden and repressed parts. As you kind of go through that and reflect on those things, they're going to start, more and more things are going to start making sense and more coming to your immediate environment, your immediate ideas and your immediate mindset in a sense as we move forward into February.
I like that. That's a really good point, because it's like by the time we get to the later part of the month when the Sun and Mercury move into Aquarius, they're moving out of that 12th house. So it's like they're moving out of that reflective phase. And then by the later part of the month, when they form that conjunction in the first house, it's like communicating and being ready to communicate some of those insights that you had during that more reflective phase in the first half of the month.
Yeah, being able to connect the dots that you sit there and reflected about.
Definitely. That makes sense. All right. I think that's bringing us to the end of the month then. Is there any major things that we meant to mention that we forgot? I think that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for joining me today. You actually do horoscopes each month on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of astrology content. If you guys want to check me out, follow my YouTube at White Light Astrology, or if you're on Twitter, follow me at White Light Cam, or just check out White Light Astrology for everything else. WhiteLightAstrology.com, I should say.
Brilliant. And I'll put links to those in the description page for this video below this video. I've also just launched posters for the Planetary Alignments Astrology Calendar posters for 2019, where I use the artwork from some of these horoscope videos, but we actually put it on a poster so you can see the entire year ahead and track some of your personal transits on a handy, easy to use chart for 2019. So you can find out more information about that at theastrologypodcast.com/2019 posters. And yeah, I think that's about it.
I think that's it.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for watching. And we will see you again next month for the horoscopes for February of 2019. So have a great month.